Thank you. Right, yes. I'm Espen. I am Norwegian indeed. I'm a creative director and a designer. I just moved to Oslo a couple of months ago. It's been quite a transition from Edinburgh. People think of Norwegians as just throwing away money. It's true. It's really fucking expensive. This is me paying for a coffee. So it's a bit of a transition for me, but I'm really happy that I can be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me. Like Oliver said, I co-founded an agency called Primates. We're obviously based in Edinburgh, but I'm trying to branch out now and start the Oslo branch as well. We recently got funding for a little app called Sprinter, which we're trying to push. And also, if you guys want to chat to me or look at my pictures, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at eBrunborg. But I'm here to talk about comedy and web design, I guess. Not just jokes and funny stuff, but also tragic stuff and emotional stuff, inspiring stuff. Basically, the sort of personality that you don't get necessarily in a style guide or a set of, in a CSS file. I thought it would be good to kick us off by recapping on how we got to where we are. And I brought a book, which I'm going to read a short chapter from. Can we do the lights? Excellent. I think this is the best venue ever to read this book. In the beginning, there was only HTML, and the internet was very ugly indeed. And God said, "Let there be style." And behold, there was CSS. And the people praised all colors and all fonts, and they floated left and they floated right, and they rejoiced. And God was very pleased with himself, and he decided to celebrate with a few drinks. On the second day, God created Flash. And he was very hungover when he did so. And he said, "Praise me, I guess, for I have given you now vector graphics and animation." And his followers praised him as they waited for the page to load. Oops. And then they clicked skip intro. And God was very disappointed because he worked really hard on that intro. And they inserted adverts on all their pages, and God started to think that maybe Flash was a mistake and that it was a bad idea to get drunk on a Monday night. On the third day, God created WordPress as he was determined to correct his mistake. And he said, "Praise me, for I have given you a voice. Now go forth and blog about love and kindness and everything that is good about the world. Hallelujah." And his followers rejoiced, and they said, "Hallelujah, world." And God thought that was a great pun. And they blogged vigorously about interior design and makeup and celebrities, and then they developed WordPress plugins for all of their adverts. On the fourth day, God created the iPhone, and the world went completely bonkers for it. But a young disciple named Ethan from Boston despaired, and he pleaded with the Lord, "Dear Lord, the iPhone is really great and all, but now our clients are asking for two websites, one for mobile and one for desktop. Can you help us out?" And the Lord heard his plea, and he appeared before Ethan in the shape of a burning modem. And the Lord said, and then he gave young Ethan the whole staff of media queries and told him to spread the gospel of responsive design. And the world finally rejected Flash because the iPhone wouldn't display their adverts. And then on the fifth day, God unleashed upon his creation HTML video and retina screens and professional typography and all kinds of other marvelous things. And he said, "Praise me, for I have made it so that you can express yourself more beautifully and more creatively." And his followers rejoiced, and the internet tripled in size, and everything took forever to load. And autoplay video adverts became a thing. On the sixth day, God created preprocessors and frameworks and style guides and pattern libraries and design systems. And he said, "Praise me, for I have made it so that you can express yourself more efficiently and more consistently." And his followers rejoiced and quickly set about arguing about naming conventions. Yet God went to bed smiling because he knew that his work was done. His creation was complete. And he was really looking forward to Netflix and chill. So it was with glee that on the seventh day he awoke, and he was really excited to see what his followers had made of his creation. And he visited all of the websites and all the web apps, and he wondered, how can so many different things look so similar? And he wondered, why is there adverts everywhere, and why does everything take so long to load? And he clicked a link that said, "Lion meets human adoptive father after 13 years. You'll never guess what happened next." And he was very disappointed when he found out, because he already knew, because God is all-knowing. And the more God explored, the more frustrated he grew. And by the end of the day, he said, "Jesus Christ." And Jesus said, "Yes, Dad?" And God said, "Never mind, Jesus, it's just an expression." But he thought, fuck this. I gave my followers a great voice, but they're not speaking of anything important. I gave them boundless creativity, but everything is just dull. They are not worthy. So God decided to smite his followers and cleanse his creation of sin. And thus, he created ad blockers and went back to sleep. Wow, thank you, thank you. Okay, so that's kind of the brief history of the beginning of the internet, which takes us to now, 2017. We have a fairly homogeneous web. A lot of websites look the same, but we also have some great things like publishing platforms that are practically free, hosting packages that are super easy to set up. We've got templates, we've got themes, we've got frameworks. It's basically super easy to make stuff online these days. What we have is this great publishing machine, which looks like this. You've probably used it in some shape or other. It's really simple. It consists of 3 parts, the first one being the CMS part. This is where we get to choose which platform to host all our content on. There's a whole bunch of buttons there. If you want to create a blog, you can press the WordPress button. If you want to create a magazine, you can press the WordPress button. If you want to create a brochure site or a marketing site, you can press the WordPress button. And then there's some other buttons like Squarespace or Drupal or whatever. It's endless choice between literally a handful of platforms. If the CMS handles our content, we also need layouts. We need a way to display this content in a browser. And so we choose a design system or a template for our website. Again, we have a lot of choice. As you can see from this dial, you can at least choose from 2 different templates. The first one is Classic 1. It's basically your hero image, header, a button, really aspirational statement, and 3 boxes with whatever. This is for the company that really wants to stand out. For someone less daring, you could go for Classic 2. It's a hero image, statement, a button, and then alternating left and right aligned text. It's pretty radical what we can do these days. Once you've got your design system or template, you can obviously snazz it up a little bit. We need a theme, we need a style, we need the icing on a cake, the stuff that gives it personality. We can go retro or vintage or traditional or old-fashioned, or like really kind of meta retro and go back to the shiny days, or flat, whatever you want to call it. There's a handful of buttons there too. Just make sure you don't do anything that no one else is doing, because then how will people know that you have a website that's kind of part of the same ecosystem, right? Once we have these 3 components, we can basically fiddle with some knobs and then put our content in. I can talk the whole day about content, but I'm not gonna, because who gives a shit? content's not really that important. That's why it comes last in our process. We pour the content into the big machine, we push the button, and out comes our website, our beautiful, fantastically unique, solitary website that we poured all our time in for at least half an hour. The problem is, our beautiful, unique website is one of many beautiful and unique websites. Most websites kind of look the same. They definitely work the same-ish. We tend to use the same language. They read the same. There's basically this huge predictable pattern to what a website is, which, of course, can be a good thing. I can lend you my jacket, and you will know how to use my jacket. It's good to know where the pockets are. It's good to know how navigation works and how to, I don't know, collapse an accordion. But we're not all making jackets. Some of us are, and some of us are making socks and gloves and hats and scarves and underwear. There's property listing websites, and there's charity campaigns, and there's news sites, and there's beer shops and portfolios and to-do list apps. There's a whole bunch of different functions, and so we need different forms. But our sort of cookie-cutter publishing machine doesn't have that many forms. It forces us to squeeze all these different products through the same way of thinking. This goes back a while, but Mark Bolton. Oh, shit. This is for the blasphemy earlier on. I'll just... Right, Mark Bolton wrote about this thing, and he's called it Design Abstraction Escalation. It's a bit of a precursor to all these style guides and stuff that we're seeing now, the pattern libraries. And he's saying we have a tendency to collect snippets of code or design or content, and we store them away in this big drawer, and then we reuse them. You know, we reuse the patterns that we see around us, which is a very efficient way of making websites. But he's also saying, maybe it's turning the design process into a manufacturing process. It's all we're doing is just reusing components we've seen elsewhere. So this kind of conformity and the efficiency of this way of building websites has a price. And that's what he calls design, or we can call it the soul or humanity. Basically the idea that you've created something from scratch, from the ground up, and it's not just stitched together from pre-existing patterns. Which is basically the mindset we have now. We want stuff to happen quickly. We want to be efficient. We want to be consistent. It has a lot of benefits, but maybe we're sacrificing quality or individuality. We get into this mindset where we expect to be able to push a button in some sort of software and the solution comes out the other side. Or we tweak some parameters, or we use some new technology, and then our thing gets better. Once we use full-screen video on all our pages, or once our performance budget goes down, then people will buy our stuff. But maybe technology isn't the problem. Maybe the problem is that we make a lot of shit. I mean, how many websites are actually worth visiting? We make a lot of shit, and then we expect people to just embrace that shit. But they don't. People are onto us. They want the good shit. They're even willing to pay for it, according to Joshua Topolsky. So, if people want the good shit, how do we find the good shit? Incidentally, by coincidence, that's the title of my next chapter, The Good Shit, which is elusive. It's difficult to kind of define. It's one of those things where you know it once you see it. But how do we kind of quantify good shit? What is good design these days? We can start with some easy things, like good design is fast. You want to serve your content to users when they want it. You don't want to put obstacles in their way or have friction. There's no waiting. You should make it lightweight and instant. We should make it universal, so that everybody gets the same experience no matter where they are and what device they're on or what abilities they might have. It should be intuitive. We shouldn't have to relearn interfaces every time we visit a new website. We should use the same language as our peers so that there's no learning required from our audience. Good design is sometimes invisible, in that if I stop and notice the design of something in the middle of reading an article, well, then the design is a bit too much, isn't it? Design is user-centric, or good design is user-centric. My ego as a designer has no place in the thing that I put out. Users matter the most, and if the users say they want this, or this is fiddly, or that's difficult, well, we should listen to them. And finally, good design is scientific. That means it is measurable, and we can test it, and we can use that data to make iterative improvements on our design. Hands up if you agree with those statements. A few? I think they're all true, but I want to also maybe highlight some other statements, like good design is slow. Sometimes you don't instantly create an emotional connection. Sometimes you need to take the time to tell a story or a joke or whatever. Maybe some friction helps sometimes. There's value in taking your time to make a point. Good design is really individual. If you ever read a book, and it's like the author is inside your own head. He describes exactly what you're feeling. You get this intense connection that says, oh my God, this is me. It's written for me. And it's the same way with movies or websites or other types of design. The stuff that fits you perfectly is really good. That means that sometimes it's not perfect for everybody else. In fact, your website isn't for everybody, and every website isn't for you. Good design is surprising, meaning that if we laugh at an unexpected joke, or we discover something like an Easter egg, or we have to go through a process that's actually challenging us in some way, there's a reward at the end of that, and that's empowering. Discovery can be really empowering. Good design can be super impressive. If you've seen great calligraphers, for example, or great illustrators, sometimes just the sheer visual quality of what they produced, you can see the evidence of the effort put into it, it makes it more impressive. Good design can be visionary. We can talk about the car. When the car was invented, the focus group back then probably would have asked for a faster horse because no one could see the car coming. If Steve Jobs took his iPod prototype and just showed it to people in a focus group, he probably would have gotten pretty mixed reviews. And good design is artistic, meaning it is challenging sometimes. It can be emotional, it can be enlightening, it can be deep, it can go deeper than the surface level. It's not always about solving a UI problem or making some process a little bit smoother. Sometimes it's about creating a deeper emotional connection. And these original experiences, I don't think we can A/B test ourselves on the way to them. So, I think both of these sets are true. I think we need fast stuff that's efficient and consistent, and I think we need creative stuff that's a bit weird, and maybe there's some friction there, and it's maybe difficult or challenging sometimes. But we seem to fight. On the one hand, we have the advocates of performance and lightweight sites and super efficient style guide-based design, and on the other, you have the previously Flash nerds who wants loads of animation and videos and the splash and scroll hijacking and all this crazy stuff. And maybe we shouldn't focus so much about what's right, one or the other. Maybe they're not mutually exclusive. I think there's a way of combining them. I think a good website, a good experience online can have both science and art elements to it, both utility and beauty, both music and comedy. I'm 20 minutes in, and I've just mentioned comedy for the first time. That's good. This is Jeff Greenspan. I met him a couple of years ago in Barcelona. We talked a lot about comedy. He's an artist, creative director, and now for the last year has been a stand-up comic as well. We both loved Seinfeld. We spoke about that. We spoke about music. And then Jeff said something really inspiring to me. He said, Espen, music and comedy is pretty much the same thing. They work in the same way because they're both based on rhythm. Music and comedy is rhythm. They play the same instrument, being our brain, they just play it slightly differently. So rhythm, what is that? Well, in terms of music, rhythm is super easy. It's super tangible. We can dance to it, snap our fingers to it. It's just there. Everybody knows what rhythm is. In comedy, there's also rhythm, but it's invisible. It's to do more with the form of a joke. I have a chapter called Hipster Jokes, which will demonstrate the rhythm of comedy. The rhythm of comedy is basically threefold. It's the setup, the anticipation, and the punchline. In this example, the setup is how did the hipster burn his tongue? Then we anticipate some sort of response. And the punchline is he drank his coffee before it was cool. Okay, let's try that again. This time, I'll get rid of the anticipation slide. How did the hipster die? He drowned in the mainstream. Final joke, how much does a hipster weigh? An Instagram. Right, you get it. It's a setup, and then there's a punchline at the end of it, which basically means rhythm is expectation and reward. You set something up, and then you do something with that setup. In music, that reward is that the expectation is met. So if you hear the beginning of a rhythm, you want the next beat to come at a certain time, and when it does, you can dance. If you hear a certain harmony, you want it to sound nicely together, and when it harmonizes, you feel good and it feels like music. Music meets your expectations. Comedy is the opposite. But first, let's look at music and expectations, and I think I have time to play a very, very short clip, which is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Expectations. Watch.
That's a very short clip from a longer segment. You should really watch it. It's Bobby McFerrin demonstrating the power of expectation in certain musical harmonies. So in music, you're rewarded because your expectation is met. That's why it works. In comedy, it's the opposite. So you set up a situation or a premise, and then we reward that by violating the expectation. In this case, we have Bob. Bob is going to work, and the expectation is that he will just, sit down at his desk and start working, maybe, go on Facebook, go home to his wife and kids. That's the expectation I'm setting up, and then I break the expectation. See what I did there? Now, those sniggers, the fact that this is even remotely funny, is only because I broke the expectation, right? Comedy only works when we don't get what we expect. Anyway, that's music and comedy and how they work generally. I got super inspired and started thinking, how does this relate to me? Because I'm the most important thing to me. And I started thinking about storytelling. And I thought, you know what? Storytelling uses both these kind of phenomena, both music and comedy, because storytelling relies on some sort of structure, some sort of familiarity. There's certain expectations that have to be met in order for a story to work. That's why we have classical setups and acts in a story. We have the setup, confrontation, and resolution. This is kind of the musical structure of a story. For example, Luke Skywalker, he learns about the Empire in the first act. He fights the Empire in the second, and then he is victorious in the third. But Star Wars would be super boring if it was just a straight line, if it was a linear story. That's where the comedy comes in. The comedy takes your structure and adds a little bit of dynamics to it, so it's more surprising and more interesting and more funny and more scary and all these things. There's shock and there's surprise and there's plot twists. Like, he finds out Vader is his father. Sorry if I'm spoiling this for anybody. He finds out Leia is his sister. Oh. The takeaway is this, that music sets expectations, then meets them, and comedy sets them and then breaks them. Good storytelling relies on both. And what are we as web designers if not storytellers? Sometimes we literally tell stories as like maybe we're doing a design for an article and you know, we're literally about reading a long form piece of text that is a story. Or we are selling a product or selling a service or describing something. We're literally telling a story through visual communication. Other times we are helping users tell stories by essentially setting up journeys for them. We create the environment, we set up the signpost, and then the story gets told as the user interacts with the product. So no matter where you are online, there's storytelling involved in some way. You know, if it's Facebook, Amazon, or a barbershop website, whatever it is, we tell stories. And I think the difference between a good designer and a bad one is how well we tell those stories. And I think to tell stories well, we need music and comedy. Or metaphorically speaking, we need music and comedy. Just to show you roughly what I mean, in terms of web design, music represents the predictability and the consistency. It's the stuff that make website feel easy to use and intuitive, and it just happens, and it's delightful because we didn't have to think. It's just, oh, I've ordered an Uber now. It's fantastic. Comedy is the opposite of that. It's personality, difference, friction, randomness, unpredictability. It's all the unexpected stuff. It's the stuff that make our sites less predictable, the stuff that make them more memorable and more like, oh, what's going on there? And maybe create some sort of spark. I'll show a few examples to just highlight what I mean. This is from Medium, and obviously it's the perfect musical reading experience. There's no friction here. There's nothing that you wouldn't expect. It's just pure typography set well with images interspersed. There's no scroll hijacking. If you want to read a post, you can read it. Super easy. Then there's magazines like Amplify. This is also online. This is made by a company in Edinburgh, where we're also taking a reading experience, but every single piece of content gets individual attention. And put together all these like design elements and layouts and interactions and hover states, all this stuff, it builds some sort of personality around the content. I'm not saying this is necessarily better, but it's in a way more memorable. It has more personality. It basically has the power to work with the content rather than just being a container for the content. But, says this guy, whose name is Mr. Butts, Mr. Butts says not every site is like a blog, and not everyone can afford to pay individual attention to every single layout. That's really expensive. But that's also beside the point. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying that's one way of infusing your site with more personality. This is one with oodles of personality, but it's super easy to do. It's so straightforward. All the site does is says, hello, my name is Alan, I write fiction. There's no hero image here, there's no navigation, there's no typewriters. It's just those three statements. And the magic happens when I interact with it. Every underlined word reveals a bit more information. I actually have to click quite a few times here to find his Twitter, and then I have to click again to find his contact details, which is weird, right, for a website. You'd think that someone who is in the business of writing fiction would want me to just see how to get hold of him really quickly. But if I landed on that site as someone who's looking for inspiration, or in this context, and just saw a plain old site, well, it wouldn't be in my slides, would it? I wouldn't remember it. He's forcing me to read his story because he's triggering some sort of weird repressed memory of playing Dungeons and Dragons books, those text adventures. And I sat on this site for a while and I basically read the first chapter of his book. And I was like, okay, you got me, well done. But, says Mr. Butts, hiding things like contact details is way too risky for me. That's understandable too. We can be different in other ways, like randomness. This is a small portfolio site from Rich Cahill from Dundee. All the information is the same here, but every time you reload or interact with the logo, well, the layout kind of changes based on some random parameters. Colors change too. It's not like the site is unusable. It's got a very, very clear structure to it. It just makes it a little bit more fun to interact with. There's nothing wrong with that. But, says Mr. Butts, random doesn't work for my organization. We need all these things to be on the homepage at all times. That's fine. How about you just go and change your design visually? So you get rid of all pictures, all colors. You do a lot of cool stuff with your hover states. You include tickers, and you sell out. Obviously, this is a big design conference, right? So maybe we would have sold out anyway. I'm not attributing the sellout of the event to the design. But it certainly didn't hurt, did it? And how many conference websites have you seen? And when you leave tonight, you'll remember this one and not the other ones, I think. But, says Mr. Butts, who can be quite annoying sometimes, he's saying, well, we're not a quirky design conference, we're a big corporation. There's certain things we just, it's too risky for us, and that's okay as well. Even if you're big, you can still have personality. This is before Zendesk did their really cool rebrand. But I guess their motto has always been this idea of bringing customers and companies closer together. So they have a fairly standard website layout here, but they have this quirky video, which really adds to their statement. But how many websites do you see and you snigger? Not many, right? But, says Mr. Butts, and I say, fuck you, Mr. Butts. There's always going to be buts, right? There's going to be budget constraints and whatever, difficult clients, or maybe you're too scared yourself. I've certainly been there. But we can manage these risks, and we could just make small steps just to express ourselves with more personality. I'll show some quick things from our own website that we launched earlier this year. A big deal for us is that we're not just working on products. It's a real sort of partnership between us and our clients. So we're highlighting clients and our staff on the homepage. And every time you reload, well, you get a new combination. Just a really, really simple thing, but it speaks to one of our core tenets, which is this relationship between us and the people that we work for. And that people angle we carry through on other pages as well. So instead of showing here on our kind of clients page, we're not showing screenshots of all the work, we're showing their faces. And if you kind of interact and explore a little bit, you get to see just a tiny bit more about what the project did for them. So it's taking a concept or an idea and just pushing it a little bit, not just showing what everyone else is showing. This idea of rewarding exploration, we also have on the team page. I'll skip all the photos here. We have this little timeline, right? We've had this timeline since we started, and it's not really that useful. It just shows roughly when we started and where we are now. But then we thought, well, let's just add some more stuff to it, like the Industrial Revolution, and then further back to the kind of evolution of our species. And basically, this ridiculously, stupidly long horizontal scroll, which takes you back to, well, you would like to know, wouldn't you? Maybe if we wait a bit longer. Okay, nothing still. Let's actually just skip it. You can see for yourselves. In terms of humor, we also try and get across that we're human on our website. So in addition to our sort of standard, hi, I'm Gordon, this is my bio, we have the alternative monkey bios. Every person has an alter ego monkey, and we write bios for that as well. It's just a small thing that only a handful of people will probably click on. But I think it's funny to read about Bart and how he kind of killed his captor and then got all the chimpanzees together to rise up and basically take over the world in his alternate bio. And other stuff, of course, the favorite 404 page where you can do stuff. We took a leaf out of Alan's hat and made a little sort of clickable jungle adventure thing on our 404. My point is here that it doesn't take much to do something that's just one step outside of the realm of normal websites or normal content. You can just, it's okay to have a personality and make a joke every now and then. Basically, it's the difference between a straight line and a curvy line. You want some curves, you want some dynamics, you want people to think or laugh or get shocked or whatever it is, just a tiny bit of emotion, it helps to create a connection. The way I see it, generally, is that this idea of comedy, the idea of surprising stuff or emotional stuff or the unexpected, that stuff can really help you sell a concept or a product. It can help you get people on board and create a connection with them. And then the music, the conventional stuff, the stuff that makes stuff really, really easy to use, obviously helps convert or to make a purchase. I don't think I'll have time to show you this example, so I'm just going to skip and just say, why are we so serious? I think, to me anyway, it's abundantly clear that comedy, or let's just call it personality, is really important. So why are we so afraid of showing it? I think inherently on the web, we have a tendency to measure everything. For better or for worse, the technology is just there, so we can track clicks and we can track behavior and see how long people spend on somewhere, where they come from, where they're going, what browser they're using, and we just gather all this data, and then we use this data in more or less scientific ways, and we get some metrics that we can base our decisions on. And we can go to our boss or our client or our stakeholder and say, look, this version works better than that version. It's right here, and this is 0.5% more conversion, so we're going to go with this. And that makes us feel safe. But it also excludes this whole world of other stuff that we can't really test, or it's too expensive to test, or it's just a bit cumbersome, or it's a bit weird. So we're trapped in this kind of bubble of data and safe metrics. And we spend so much time focusing on how do we implement our sites? What's the rules of telling stories online, rather than how do we tell good stories? Like, what is a good story? And the result is a boring web, which makes me sad. Also makes Andy Clark a little bit angry. And I think we should be less boring and more daring. But you shouldn't do it for me or for yourself. You should do it for money, I guess. That's what our bosses and clients want. I think boring makes less money. And I think that because when I look at adverts that I've done really well and the stuff that I remember and the products that I've bought, it's the stuff that isn't boring. It's the stuff that's just slightly outside of boring or really far outside boring. This is a fact. This advert aired in 2007, and it did really well, and creative papers were writing about it, and certainly the peers were like, oh my God, that's so good, how did you get that past the board, etc. What was less reported is that it made money. It made Cadbury's money to make that insanely bold decision of having a gorilla playing the drums instead of just a picture of their chocolates. Can I have like 2 minutes extra? Thank you. I want to play another advert.
I've had my ups and downs, my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. Now I stand here before you. What you see is a body crafted to perfection. A pair of legs engineered to defy the laws of physics. And a mindset to master the most epic of splits.
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows, only time? And who can say if your love grows as your heart shows, only time? We are there, we are there.
%. Hey Volvo, I've got an idea for an ad for you. It's inspiring when people do stuff that's just a bit weird. Enya and Jean-Claude Van Damme to sell big trucks, and it works. This is part of a bigger campaign with loads of other videos as well. I'm not going to attribute the whole increase in sales to Jean-Claude Van Damme, but it shows that being creative works. It makes more money, at least in the ad industry. There's this big event in Cannes every year, the Cannes Lions. The people who enter awards there, big companies, they see year on year that the stuff that win creative awards make them more money. So there must be something to it, right? So if I had to leave you with one thing, it's basically that there's more to web design than consistency and usability and performance and these things. There is something that we're not quite unlocking yet, something about our storytelling, something that creates this connection with our audience. And so I'll leave you with, I guess, one image. I really want to burn it into your retina. I want you to think about the good shit. Imagine a world where we not only have fast websites, but funny websites. And they're scary, and they're surprising, and they're delightful. Imagine if we all just focused on the good shit instead of just staring at metrics all day. Because I don't think the good shit is in metrics. I think it's in here. It's got something to do with soul. Well, is that all the song I get? Oh well. Thank you.